Racist cops handcuffed black female general. Her call to Pentagon destroyed their careers. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet street. "You're resisting arrest," the cop snarled, twisting the black woman's arm behind her back. Bystanders gasped as she was forced onto the hood of the cruiser, her military-sharp posture never faltering. Then, in a voice like steel, she said, "You have no idea who you just handcuffed." But in 20 minutes, these two officers would beg for their careers back. And in an hour, the Pentagon would make sure they never wore a badge again. The general's background. General Naomi Carter was used to command, not compliance. At 47, she had broken through glass ceilings that most couldn't even see. The 4 stars on her uniform weren't just decorations. They were hard-earned symbols of authority granted by congressional approval following unanimous recommendations from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A decorated war strategist with 25 years of service, she had just returned from a classified overseas mission coordinating multinational defense operations in Eastern Europe. The mission had been a complex web of diplomatic negotiations and strategic military positioning that had required direct presidential authorization under Section 164 of Title 10 of the U.S. Code, authority that placed her operations directly under the Secretary of Defense's oversight. General Carter had spent the last 3 months navigating the delicate balance between NATO allies and emerging threats with a direct mandate from the National Security Council. Her decisions had been briefed to the Senate Armed Services Committee just last week in a closed-door session, with several senators remarking that her tactical acumen had likely prevented an international incident that could have escalated into armed conflict. She was on her way to debrief at the Pentagon when she stopped for coffee at a small cafe in Arlington. The classified documents in her secure briefcase contained assessments that would inform the next National Defense Authorization Act, Congress's annual legislation that directed over $800 billion in defense spending. Her signature alone could redirect military assets worth more than the GDP of several small nations. She had spent her life fighting battles, just not the kind where the enemy wore a blue uniform. The confrontation. The cops had been watching her since she stepped out of her car. Officer James Mercer, badge number 4872, a 12-year veteran of the force with 3 prior civilian complaints buried in his file, nudged his partner. "Suspicious vehicle," he muttered, eyeing her luxury sedan with government plates partially obscured by the morning light. Officer Derek Wilson, badge number 5193, newer to the force, but already adopting the department's unwritten protocols, nodded in silent agreement. What they didn't know, what they hadn't bothered to check, was that General Carter's vehicle was registered under the Department of Defense's Executive Transport Program, a detail that would have appeared immediately had they actually run the plates through their system. But they hadn't. The luxury car with its tinted windows and a black woman at the wheel had triggered something else in their assessment protocols. When she questioned their unnecessary stop after getting her coffee, they escalated immediately. "You fit a description," Officer Wilson said, his hand already resting on his holster, a gesture not protocol for routine questioning, but one that occurred with statistical significance during certain types of civilian interactions, according to the Justice Department's pattern or practice investigations of police departments across the country. Then came the cuffs, the shove, the condescending smirk from Officer Mercer as he pressed her against the hood with more force than necessary. His knee pressed into the back of her leg, not enough to injure, but enough to dominate. "Should have just cooperated," he muttered, loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear, as if narrating a justification for the body camera footage that would later become evidence. That's when Naomi stopped being just a citizen being profiled outside a coffee shop. She became General Carter, a woman who had congressional authority under Title 10 of the U.S. Code to command combat troops and who held top-secret, sensitive, compartmented information security clearance that allowed her access to information that these officers couldn't comprehend. "Let me make a call," she demanded, her voice carrying the same tone she used in the Situation Room when redirecting military assets. The power structure activated. The taller cop, Officer Mercer, laughed. "You ain't calling nobody." But Naomi had memorized emergency protocols better than they'd memorized their own badges. The Pentagon's chain of command verification system had been established after the September 11th attacks as part of the Defense Authorization Act of 2003, creating immediate authentication channels for high-ranking military personnel in civilian emergencies. With her hands restrained behind her back, she recited a series of 15 digits to a horrified bystander, a young woman who had been recording the incident on her phone. "Dial it. Now put it on speaker." The bystander, later identified as pre-law student Maya Johnson, dialed the number with shaking hands. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. "Pentagon, secure line. Authentication protocol initiated." The cops froze, their expressions shifting from arrogant certainty to the first flickers of doubt. "This is General Naomi Carter," Authentication code Sierra November 4095 Delta. Location, Arlington, Virginia. Situation, civilian detention interference with national security operations. There was a brief pause on the line as the Pentagon's verification systems confirmed her voice print and authentication code. Then came the words that turned the officer's blood to ice. Authentication, confirmed General Carter. What is your situation? This is General Carter. Badge numbers 4872 and 5193 just detained me unlawfully while en route to a Level 1 security briefing. I need immediate confirmation of their authority and identity verification. For the first time, doubt flickered in Officer Mercer's eyes. He took a half step back, suddenly aware of the gathering crowd, the recording devices, and most importantly, the voice on the speakerphone that carried the unmistakable weight of federal authority. The system responds. What happened next was a demonstration of the interlocking security apparatus that few civilians ever witness. The Pentagon's direct line to local law enforcement, established under the Homeland Security Integration Act and reinforced by numerous executive orders, activated immediately. The dispatcher's radio erupted with panic. A voice that wasn't the usual dispatch controller cut through their frequency. All units, stand down, authentication code Federal Override 37. Arlington PD, you have detained a Priority 1 Defense Department official. Repeat, stand down. The officers' radios crackled with the voice of their precinct captain. Then the chief himself. Officers Mercer and Wilson, you just cuffed a Pentagon-level officer, God help you both. Backup arrived within minutes, but not for them. 2 unmarked SUVs with federal government plates pulled up, and 4 individuals in plain clothes but with visible credentials approached. These weren't just any federal agents, they were from the Pentagon's Force Protection Agency, a specialized security unit established after the Pentagon attacks to protect DoD personnel. Naomi stood straight as her cuffs were removed by a visibly shaken Officer Wilson. General Carter, are you injured? One of the agents asked, his tone making it clear that the answer would determine just how severe the consequences would be. Physically, no, she answered, adjusting her jacket with the dignity of someone who had briefed presidents. The accountability? The cop stammered apologies, but she simply picked up the phone that was still connected to the Pentagon. Secretary, I want their records audited. Every stop, every complaint, every interaction for the past 5 years, and I want it cross-referenced with demographic data. Then to the officers, she delivered words that would haunt their careers. You targeted the wrong woman today, but I'm more concerned about all the right ones you've targeted before, those without the Pentagon on speed dial. The power she wielded wasn't just her personal authority as a general, it was the full weight of the Defense Department's civilian oversight mechanisms, established through decades of legislative refinement. The 2017 National Defense Authorization Act had specifically strengthened the Secretary of Defense's authority to protect military personnel from civilian interference, and the 2020 amendments had created new accountability measures that could be activated at the highest levels. Within hours, the incident had triggered protocols that civilian law enforcement rarely encountered. The Arlington Police Department found itself facing not just a PR nightmare, but a full federal review. Under U.S. Code Title 10, Section 375, the Secretary of Defense had direct authority to investigate any civilian impediment to military readiness, and detaining a general en route to a security briefing qualified. By sundown, the officers were suspended pending investigation. By week's end, they faced not just departmental charges, but federal ones under U.S.C. Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, a rarely used but powerful statute that carried penalties far beyond what local oversight could impose. The Pentagon's authority revealed. What these officers failed to understand was that the modern Pentagon's authority extended far beyond military bases and combat zones. Since the National Security Act of 1947 established the Department of Defense, subsequent legislation had gradually expanded its domestic authorities, particularly concerning the protection of its personnel and operations. The Goldwater-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act of 1986 had fundamentally restructured military command channels, placing generals like Carter in direct communication with civilian leadership. The post-9/11 restructuring had added layers of protection and response protocols that most Americans, even those in law enforcement, never encountered. General Carter's position granted her authorities under multiple sections of U.S. Code, particularly Title 10, Armed Forces, and portions of Title 50, War and National Defense. Her security clearance alone required protection under Presidential Executive Order 13,526, which classified her movements as sensitive national security information. When she walked into the Pentagon the next morning for her delayed briefing, the Secretary of Defense personally met her in the corridor. "Those officers' backgrounds came back, he said, handing her a tablet with the preliminary findings. Pattern of similar stops, disproportionately targeting minorities, statistical anomalies that somehow never triggered oversight. And now?" she asked. "Now they're experiencing what actual accountability feels like," he replied. "The Department of Justice has opened a pattern or practice investigation into their entire precinct." The systemic impact. On the screens throughout the Pentagon's corridors, the news played footage of the officers' perp walk into federal court. The case had drawn attention, not just for the identity of the person they had detained, but for how it exposed the dual systems of justice that operated in America. One for those with power and connections, another for everyone else. General Carter used her unexpected platform. In a rare public statement that had been vetted by both the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office and the Office of the Secretary of Defense, she addressed not just her incident, but the systemic issues it revealed. "What happened to me was resolved within an hour because of the uniform I wear and the position I hold," she stated, "but I want to acknowledge the thousands of Americans who don't have the Pentagon on speed dial, who don't have immediate recourse when their rights are violated. True national security requires justice at home, as well as vigilance abroad." The statement was careful, measured, and precise, as befitting someone of her rank, but it carried weight that extended beyond the usual military communications. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, active duty personnel were limited in their political speech, but statements about equal protection under the law fell within the acceptable parameters for a flag officer addressing issues of national cohesion. The incident became a case study at both the FBI Academy and the National Defense University, proof that even generals in street clothes outrank prejudice when the full weight of institutional power stands behind them. It demonstrated how the authorities granted to the Department of Defense under successive National Defense Authorization Acts could be deployed in unexpected contexts. For Officers Mercer and Wilson, the consequences were career-ending. The federal charges carried penalties that no police union could mitigate. Their actions had interfered with national security operations as defined under multiple statutes, triggering authorities that local departments rarely encountered. For General Carter, it was another battle won, not on a foreign battlefield, but on American streets where the Constitution's promises were tested daily. The incident would be noted in her service record as an example of maintaining composure under duress, another demonstration of the leadership qualities that had earned her 4 stars. As she settled into the secure briefing room to finally deliver her assessment of Eastern European security dynamics, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the power structures she navigated daily, some visible in the form of military hierarchies and congressional authorities, others invisible, but no less real in the form of assumptions and biases that had shaped her journey to the Pentagon's highest ranks. The next National Defense Authorization Act would include a little notice provision strengthening protections for military personnel in civilian interactions, a small but significant change to U.S. code that legal experts would later recognize as the Carter Amendment, though it never officially carried that name. If this story touched you, hit that like button and drop a karma in the comments below. Subscribe for more powerful stories that expose truth and demand justice. New episodes every week that shine light on the experiences that too often remain in the shadows. Join our community of listeners who refuse to remain silent in the face of injustice.